What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college football playoff rankings for week 11, top 25. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Get us to 200 subscribers while we're doing that autograph giveaway. But we got to look at the teams that are falling from our rankings. And this week, it's a big week. We got four teams falling. And Ty, which of these four, was kind of the big surprise falling out?
Man, I guess Oklahoma State because they almost looked like a playoff team a couple weeks ago, and now they're just in a free fall, along with Syracuse. I guess they're both just in a huge free fall right now. Not really sure what happened, but their seasons have just started to plummet for whatever reason.
And then you go to the others receiving votes, and you got some teams that are starting to make a case to get back into the rankings. Obviously, they probably won't make the playoff, but you got to look at Coastal Carolina, in my opinion. They had that one tough loss, but here they are back 8-1 and could possibly, win out and be the team that represents the non-Power Five school if, a few things go their way. So that's a team to keep an eye on. But for you, out of these four left, which was another team to keep an eye on?
I would look at Baylor as a team that could make a big second half push this season. They're coming off a big win in Norman last week, and I think they're really finding themselves. Obviously, they were a big favorite to win the Big 12 at the start of the season, but I think now they're really getting back to where we thought they would be at the start of the season. And we got Illinois coming in at number 25, a team I thought might be in the top 10 when they faced our Michigan Wolverines, but just a really questionable loss at home to Michigan State. If you look in the past, Michigan State always struggles right after they play Michigan. I mean, it's just an inexcusable loss in my opinion. I don't know how you can justify this, but it's a big hit to Illinois' resume and also to their chances to win the Big Ten West. Now this week, it's basically a must win against Purdue, or they're going to be in trouble of losing that division.
And then at 24, yes, you are reading that correctly. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish are back in. And I even took them to upset Clemson, which they did. And to say the least, this team was up 28 nothing a little halfway through the fourth quarter until, they started playing a little softer and letting Clemson get some easy things going. But the big story is the running back room and even Drew Pine on the ground. 263 total yards rushing, two touchdowns, and Clemson just couldn't stop it. And somehow, some way, this defense limited Clemson, and you're really going to see where they come in. How much we didn't really trust them as well this week. But if you're a Notre Dame fan moving forward, that big game at the end of the year against USC can really decide how this season is going to end for you guys. And if you win that game, sitting 9-3 going into a bowl game and still escape, win that, finish 10-3, in my book, that's a huge success. Depending on how it plays out. But starting at the beginning of the year, you would have told me this team could have a chance at 10 wins. I'd call you crazy.
All right, 23, we have Kansas State, really up and down team all year. They win 48 nothing over a top 10 team 2 weeks ago. And this week they almost came back. They were down big to Texas, made it close in the end, but just couldn't pull it out. So now they fall to one of those three loss teams. It seems like there's a ton of them right now. I was actually a little surprised that Martinez got the start. I know he's been the starter this year, but I thought Will Howard might have earned the job last week against Oklahoma State, but the offense looked pretty good with Martinez at quarterback. They just couldn't stop Texas when it mattered, and then it was too little, too late at the end. So this week they have a big road game at Baylor, a team who's playing really well right now. So they really need that not only to get back on track, but to stay in the Big 12 race.
Then at 22, we got Cincinnati jumping back into the rankings. They bounced back here with an okay win versus Navy, but just to do all of those teams that started losing, the Cincinnati team had to jump back in here. And if you want to go to the end of the year, last week of the regular season, that's what it comes down to for these Bearcats, where they face Tulane at the end of the year, and that will pretty much decide the American. But for Cincinnati, the outlook is still good. It's still possible to get a 10-win season.
All right, 21, we got UCF. I mean, you have to put them ahead of Cincinnati for that head-to-head win. And for them, I think this week really just is going to decide who's going to be that group of five team in the New Year's Six Bowl. I think UCF controls their own destiny to be that team, even with that bad loss they had to East Carolina. I still think this team has a lot of talent. The offense is starting to really find their groove. And I would not be surprised if they're 11-2 playing in I think it's the Cotton Bowl this year. But either way, I think they'll be a New Year's Six team at the end of the year.
And then at 20, we got Texas jumping back into the rankings with their big win on the road at K-State. This was pretty much a Bijan Robinson game. He took over. Quinn Ewers did just enough. The defense stepped up when they needed it most. At the end of the game, they forced the fumble on K-State's last drive to get the win. And this Texas team, if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt against Bama, possibly get a win, a few other things, go their way. This team honestly could be 9-0 at this point. But they just have, had small hiccups along the road. And those three losses are by a total of 11 points. So it's not like they're doing anything too bad. They just can't get it done right now for those games, but they finally get that big win. And now they have TCU, who's undefeated at home. And if you can get this win, it doesn't just help your Big 12 title chances, but it also knocks a team out more than likely of the college football playoff to make it more crazy. So if you're a Longhorn fan, I think this is the big game of the year, your kind of Super Bowl for this week.
All right, at 19, Washington jumps back in. A team I think a lot of people forgot about after their midseason struggles, but now Michael Penix is starting to really find himself again. And with him at quarterback, Washington could be in any game. They could also lose by a lot in any game because of his inconsistencies. But he always has a couple games a year where he just completely dominates a defense. So maybe this week will be that game against Oregon, a really tough road game, but it's a must win if they want to stay alive and keep their slim Pac-12 chances alive. But obviously, that's going to be really tough going to Oregon, a team that's playing really well right now. But either way, I think first season under a new coach for Washington, you got to look at this as a success, no matter how the rest of the season plays out.
Then at 18, we got Liberty moving up after a big road win against an SEC team. Hugh Freeze is possibly making his case for coach of the year after what he has done to this team. And remember, this team only has one loss, and that one loss was to Wake Forest at Wake Forest, second week of the year by 1 point. So if you're really coming down to it, this Liberty team could be 9-0 with some big wins. And if they were 9-0, the theoretic, hyper everything, going into it. Could this team be the fourth college football playoff team? Just because of how crazy the season has been, and more than likely with a lot of teams at least having one loss. But obviously that's not going to happen. But you do have to look at the positive side here. This team could be the non-Power 5 team if they win out, because they don't play in a conference championship, and they don't, they're done after the 12 games, no matter what happens. So they'll just have to wait it out to go from there. And you got to be, ecstatic if you're a Liberty fan. At last year was a good year, and especially this year.
All right, 17, we have Tulane. They're not winning in the prettiest of fashions, but the bottom line is they keep winning. They're 5-0 in the American now. They're the last team that's undefeated in American play. Michael Pratt, not exactly lighting it up at quarterback, but they just continue to run the ball with a ton of success. And if you can run for 300 yards, you're pretty much going to beat anybody. So now coming in at 8-1, also have that road win at Kansas State under their belt. Like I said with UCF, this is the game this week. They get it at home. If they can win this game, then they're definitely in control to be that group of 5 team in the Cotton Bowl.
Then at 16, we got NC State moving up a little bit after not a beatdown on Wake Forest, but limiting Wake Forest. Wake Forest has been a very high scoring offense. They couldn't get anything going on the ground against this NC State front. And to their point, MJ Morris has really stepped in and been a great quarterback this year. And I like this team, not to represent the ACC in the ACC championship game, but everything is on the table now in that division. And I just think, Clemson's obviously going to be there, but who knows? You never know. Especially next year they're going to take the top 2 teams. It's going to make it a lot interesting. And could you see that moving forward in other divisions?
All right, Penn State moving up a couple spots. Just a team that takes care of business in every game, except when it's against a superior opponent, like we saw with Michigan and Ohio State. It's like the old Michigan teams we used to see. They beat everyone they're supposed to beat, and they can't beat teams above them, and that's what Penn State is this year. So you can expect them to win that home game this week against Maryland, get to 8-2, and if you look at the rest of their schedule, there's no reason to think they shouldn't be 10-2 at the end of the season, and maybe even a New Year's Six team. They're going to have 10 wins, 2 losses against, probably top 5 teams. So is this really sustainable for Penn State? Is this what they wanted when they extended Franklin for 10 years, or are they not meeting their expectations? That's only questions that Penn State could answer right now, but I think you got to look at this as still a fairly successful season so far, coming in at 7-2, the defense playing really well. And, if they had a better quarterback, who knows what their record would be.
14, we got the Utah Utes, and a big win against USC, and then following that up with Arizona win. But this team, would be benefiting from possibly the 12-team playoff this year. Those two losses are two decent losses. They just can't win the big ones. I mean, I know USC was a big win, but other than that, every time they're 1-2 in big games this year. And, if they're 2-1 in that, could be having a whole different conversation. But the only thing they can rely on is that 5-1 record in conference play. They play Oregon next week, and if they win that one, then this team might be moving into the top 10 and possibly representing in the Pac-12 championship game. And that's going to come down to Cameron Rising. He's had some really good games, and then he's had some stinkers where they squeak by or even lose. So if they want to win that game at Oregon next week, they're going to have to rely on Rising to have a great game.
All right, North Carolina moving up to 13. And I think it's a team that no one really talks about, but they just keep winning. They have a Heisman candidate in Drake May and a really good wide receiver, obviously, in Josh Downs. 15 catches this week. And it wasn't, they didn't exactly dominate Virginia, but I think it was not as close as that score. It was a really late touchdown by Virginia to make that a 3-point game. But I think North Carolina controls their own destiny to get to the college football playoff. If they can get to 11-1 and then beat Clemson in the ACC championship, they're at least going to have a really strong argument to get in at 12-1. So bottom line, they just need to keep winning, and that starts this week with a big game at Wake Forest.
Then at 12, yes, out of the top 10, we got the Alabama Crimson Tide with the heartbreaking loss in overtime at LSU. And, it was very hard for us to move them out of the top 10. But at the same time, this team has only lost their 2 games by a total of 4 points. Maybe it's a little bit of an overreaction and just, going on other teams' records and whatnot. But this team is pretty much done for the college football playoff. But there is, there's always a way for Alabama to possibly sneak in. If Georgia loses a game here and there, a lot of things need to happen for them in the SEC to even have a shot at that. You got to like what Bryce Young is doing for this team. I think it's probably the best quarterback that Bama has had, most talented in, Saban's era. And I think it might be one of, the worst wide receiver cores and tight end cores and running back cores that they've had around him. And I think that's where it faults here. But nonetheless, this Bama defense could have done more to, help Bryce Young. I mean, he still put up 31 points, and it just wasn't enough for him.
All right, Clemson also out of the top 5 this week after just getting destroyed at Notre Dame. And I would say they are probably the biggest frauds this year. I mean, we definitely thought that before this game, but now it's obvious that they just were not a top 4 team. They had some wins that looked really good early in the season, but Wake Forest, NC State, those teams are just not what we thought they would be. So this team really doesn't have a marquee win. So even if they win out, I don't think they're just going to be a lock to get in. I think they're going to have a team lose, like a Tennessee maybe. Someone's probably going to have to lose to help them out to get them in, because you can't just get blown out in a game like this, coast through an easy conference, and expect to get in. So I think there's going to be some question marks surrounding Clemson, rightfully so. They have probably just North Carolina left in the ACC championship. Other than that, they have 3 pretty easy games to end the year. It's going to be another big game for them against a solid team. Can they win it this time?
And then starting our top 10, we got the Ole Miss Rebels coming off of a bye week. Lane Kiffin and his squad, are they going to shock the world against Bama? Because essentially, this is a game that if Ole Miss wants to get into the playoff and even the SEC championship, you have to win. And it comes down to Jackson Dart. If he can play his best game that he's had all year, then honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised. Not they just win, but win convincingly, because Alabama has shown signs of weakness in their 2 losses this year. And if they can have a good game plan, then you never know. Just because it is Alabama and whatnot, but then again, it's also at Alabama after a loss. So you have to take those things into account. But Ole Miss has had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and it should be a good one.
All right, LSU. We finally put them into the top 10 this week at number 9. We had them a little lower last week than the college football playoff rankings, but I mean, there's no denying it now. They take down Alabama at home. Finally, I think it was 5 in a row they had lost on their home field to Alabama, but they finally get it done. And as much as I am not a big Brian Kelly fan, but I got to give him props. Going for 2 there in overtime, that was 100% the right call. And, obviously it worked out really well. They had the play call drawn up. And now LSU is the team that controls their destiny in the SEC West. But I think this week's going to be a really tough game for them. Arkansas is a solid team, especially to play on the road. And, obviously the letdown factor is going to be in play here coming off their biggest win in a long time.
Then at 8, we got USC moving up, and I think this is possibly the second biggest fraud in our rankings here. And I say that because I think it was 24 at one point in this game. And you look at that final score, and they only won by 6 against a lowly Cal team. And it's not Caleb Williams' fault. It's the defense. And if this team does make the college football playoff, they are going to get gashed by any team that makes it because this defense is very bad. They're letting up 35 points to Cal, and you get, Michigan, Ohio State with good weather, Georgia anytime. And those 3 teams, right now are in the top 3. This USC team will not compete. It's easy to say. And I think I think Lincoln Riley has taken his Big 12 over and just didn't really think about defense in his first year in the Pac-12.
All right, UCLA coming in at number 7. I think a lot of people might be surprised at them being ahead of USC, but UCLA has that win over Utah, who's a really good team. And if you look at USC, they haven't really beat anybody this year. So I think UCLA deserves to be ahead of them. They only had that one loss. People tend to forget about that as well. Not exactly a dominant performance this week against a lowly team in Arizona State. This week they get another poor team in Arizona, so they should get to 9-1. But big games are still on the horizon. Obviously, they still have their rivalry game against USC that might determine who wins the Pac-12. So this team is still in the thick of the Pac-12 and college football playoff race. And if they win out, I think they're in.
And then at 6, we have those Oregon Ducks with a very convincing win on the road at Colorado. They get Washington this week, which should be a decent game and possibly another ranked win for these Ducks. But at the end of the day, they blew out pretty much one of the worst teams in college football this year. And Bo Nix is looking excellent. A lot of people wrote him off coming into this year, and especially after that Georgia game. But he has really turned his season around. And this team, I think it's going to be hard to not put this team in the college football playoff if they win out and do everything that they can do. And I think they control their own destiny as well. We have them at 6 here. Obviously, Ohio State, Michigan, one of those teams is going to lose eventually. And, the teams above them, possibly could fall, and it could fall right into Oregon's lap if they win out here. But that's the thing, if they win out, and they do have a big game at the end of the year, and then obviously the Pac-12, where we're really going to see what this team is made of. But I think that's why I'm concerned about them this week. It could be a trap game for them. Washington, we've seen them play opponents tough when it matters most, and they kind of get overlooked because, we have Washington ranked here, and they're 7-2, so they're a very good team as well. But if this Ducks wants to get into the playoff, they are going to have to win convincingly.
All right, Tennessee drops to number 5. Obviously, no shame in losing at Georgia, who is clearly the best team in the country right now. But they did kind of get dominated in that game. A late garbage time touchdown was what made it a 14-point game. Otherwise, this is a 6-point performance from what was the best offense in the country coming into this game. Did this cost Hendon Hooker his Heisman chances? Maybe. But I think Tennessee, if they win out, I think they're still going to get in the playoff. If you look at the teams around them, I think they still do control their own destiny. A lot of people think they don't, but I don't see 4 other teams that are going to be ahead of them if everyone wins out. So I think they're still fine. Nothing to worry about yet. And if you look at their schedule, they should have 3 easy wins to finish the season at 11-1. So I think all this really cost them is that 1 seed, and now they might have to play Georgia in a rematch, which nobody wants. But overall, really successful season for Tennessee, and now they just have to keep winning.
And at 4, we do have TCU making our last spot in the playoff. And that is due to in part to those teams losing and they just keep on winning. I think it's still nerve-wracking to be a TCU fan right now because I still don't think they control their own destiny. They do have a tough, Big 12 matchup this week against Texas on the road. And if you win that, I think then I'm more convinced that this team is legit. And it's just tough because this team was down in the third quarter to a average Texas Tech team at home. But then Max Duggan came out and did better in the third and fourth quarter and essentially led this team to a win. So if this TCU team really wants to make the playoffs, they're going to have to show us more going forward in these last three regular season games, and especially in the Big 12 championship, where they'll face the best of the best.
All right, at number 3, we have our Michigan Wolverines. Man, that first half was ugly. Down at half to Rutgers. If you look across the country, nobody really had a dominant performance outside of Georgia, and Michigan outscored them 38-0 in the second half. So I think that really answered a lot of questions that people might have had at halftime. And I think the underrated part of Michigan is their second half adjustments that they've made, something that they have failed to do in the past under Don Brown, most notably. Their current defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, he has done an unbelievable job fixing every defensive mistake in the first half and just dominating the second half. It's happened the last few weeks. So I think that's a really underrated thing going forward. Against Ohio State, you need 60 minutes of really good football, not 30. So I think they do have a lot of things to clean up if they're going to win that game in Columbus.
And at 2, we do have those Buckeyes dropping from number 1 to 2. And I think, non-bias aside, because obviously I'm not big on Ohio State here, if they don't have good weather in this game, it's a struggle for these teams. And they go at home against Indiana, where it's going to be, almost as cold, probably not as windy, but as cold. And, the Michigan game they still have left and whoever they play in between there. I mean, it's going to be, interesting to see how this Ohio State team handles the weather because Mayan Williams, I mean, he had 26 attempts against a very bad Northwestern front and he only put up 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, it's still a good day in the office, but you would think there would be more there. And that's where CJ Stroud committed. He came in, had 79 rushing yards, but he didn't do anything. And I think that he took a step back in the Heisman race as well. And, Blake Corum obviously still had a great day for our guys. And I think, he might be one of the leading candidates now just because of, how bad Stroud and Hooker played. But, you can't overreact at just one game and the weather because they adapted very well in the second half to it. And that's where the Buckeyes prevailed. And I think that's why we still have them here at 2 because they did still show signs of life. And that defense is still very good.
All right, but at number 1, no debate here. We have the Georgia Bulldogs just dominating Tennessee, who was coming in ranked number 1 in the college football playoff rankings. So, I mean, you have no choice but to rank this team 1. And I think they're far above everyone else. I think it's Georgia in a tier by themselves, and then everyone else. They are just that dominant right now. I know they had a couple hiccup performances, but if you look at this performance right here against Tennessee, and then their 49-3 win over Oregon. There's no way you could put anyone else at 1. I think that win alone against Oregon is just going to go a really long way. Even if they happen to lose a game, I think that's going to really help them because Oregon looks like a dominant team right now. Georgia beat them by 46. So going forward, I think this week if they can get through a tough road game at Mississippi State, especially coming off that win, then they should finish 12-0 going into that SEC championship. And obviously, if they win that, then they'll be the 1 seed in the playoffs. So all things are going well in Georgia. I think they could even afford to lose a game and they'll still get in.
And that's going to be it for our video today. Make sure you guys come back for our weekly picks of the biggest games this week and to stay tuned for our college basketball rankings as well, as we're going to start getting those basketball videos out there as well. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.
She never called back.